LSE as well.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I'm a bit of a fish out of water in this crowd. My roots and interest in AI go way back. I have the honor of having been the first woman member of the Oxford Artificial Intelligence Society back in the early 1980s. But like everyone, actually, I'm not an expert in AI, and I said that to someone yesterday, and they said, no one is. There's no such thing. So moving us on. Just a little bit about what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at some of the threats as I'm going to be talking from the social science point of view, so I'm going to be looking at some of the threats as people think about them and as they're evolving in work and in a more public sphere. I also want to just take a second to talk about some of the stakes at the moment. I think we're in a time, and who knows how long-lived it will be, but where we've never had better science and technology, and especially the rise of the digitization of basically everything. It's utterly ubiquitous. And at the same time, our political process appears to be paying less and less attention in its political reasoning to more scientific, perhaps you might say, ways of reasoning to come up with political answers for things. So I think that what we do policy-wise in this arena really matters at the moment. Okay, so the latter part of last year was a big time. All these reports came out in October. Everybody saw them. And we got a sense of just what the big breakthroughs have been. There's a quote here from the White House report on AI research strategy. And in that report, we also were told how much is being spent by the government in AI-related technologies, approximately $1.1 billion in 2015. The UK report that's referred to there, the House of Commons report, also came up with a bunch of recommendations, including putting together a commission, and I gather that the Royal Society is part of doing that right now. Okay, so just a quick discursus on the terms of AI and machine learning. When you talk to more everyday people, and I'm mostly talking about educated everyday people here, but people not in computer science, not in artificial intelligence, not in engineering, people have opinions about the terms, but they don't necessarily overlap terribly well with what we heard this morning. So there's some speculation that the word artificial will shift, just as it did, for example, reproductive technologies used to be called artificial reproductive technologies. The acronym never changed, and it just became assisted reproductive technologies. So is there a sort of built-in acronymization of the normalization? Will that happen over time? It's also the case that people use machine learning and AI and robotics in ways that are not as nicely sorted as Greg gave us this morning. I think in particular, people often use them interchangeably, and it really can be task or sector specific, or to do with just what they know about, or what they don't know about can be whether or not they use them separately. I also think that robots and robotics are just constantly there, and they go in and out in quite old entropic ways and in very new ways. But one thing that I would want to insist on is that when the general public, as it were, thinks about machine learning, there really is an element. You can't just dodge the general intelligence issue, the artificial general intelligence issue. You can't say it's not realistic or it won't happen, because it's always there in the imaginary. It's always around. People are playing with it in sometimes very domain-specific ways, but they want newness or creativity. They want things that seem general, or they want flexibility. And people are I've found very sort of mechanism, small c Catholic. They don't mind whether it's a sort of emergent property or whether it's built in somehow, whether it's deterministic, whether it's predictable. They don't care about that, but it's there. It's in the way that they're talking and thinking. It's also really notable that people normalize the ubiquitous intervention of machine learning in our lives incredibly well and incredibly fast. We're really, really gifted at hybridizing with these things. So that's something that, for all the kind of fear and things, we should take seriously. Okay, there were the National Artificial Intelligence R&D strategic plan had a number of goals. I'm not going to go through them. Everybody here has read them. But just to point out that strategy 3 was explicitly about the ethical, legal, and societal implications of AI. But if you look carefully at all of the strategies, you'll see that many disciplines are needed to address any one of them. For example, strategy 5, I'll just pick one at random, develop shared public data sets and environments for AI training and testing. Those public data sets are going to depend on who is involved in preparing them, whether they're in the public or private domain, whether they're covered with national security, or whether they're more civilian. A lot of different kinds of things are going to determine those, and there are clearly big social, ethical, and legal issues involved in the other strategies for the strategic plan as well. People also probably saw that the Partnership on Artificial Intelligence to Benefit People and Society, the partnership from back in September last year, took on board civil liberties and civil rights experts just last week, or at least let the rest of us know that they were doing that or had already done that just last week. Again, the kinds of issues that they are concerned with are deeply interdisciplinary at every level. So they through from being understandable and interpretable, benefiting and empowering as many people as possible, educating the public, but also listening to the public, actively engaging stakeholders, and the ethical, social, legal implications. And then some more specific breakdowns of what that might mean. Okay, so what kinds of things are people, civilians, let me call me and us civilians vis-a-vis you guys for the purposes of this evening's talk, what kinds of things are we concerned with? Well, one of the things we notice is that what we consider human intelligence seems to be being rapidly changed by the advent of machine learning. And we're noticing that especially arenas that in kind of educated communities people used to think were definitive of intelligence. You only had to go to your local chess school to have some convert tell you that chess was the purest form of intelligence. And now when you watch these high level chess games, the young people playing them learned with machine learning. They learned with it. So what it is to be intelligent now is being increasingly defined in this hybridized way. And I would imagine that that's going to be true across more and more domains. And again, I can't judge whether it's true that Lee Sedol played better after playing with DeepMind, after playing with AlphaGo, but there's all this lore, L-O-R-E, out there that that's the case, that somehow we learn better, we think better, we're more intelligent after interacting with these systems. And I was even thinking earlier, gosh, I could learn to say, I'll get back to you this afternoon. And as my email answering program might do, rather than say, dear so-and-so, now do I say lots of love or very best wishes? Just, I'll get back to you this afternoon. So there's this sort of hybrid, this back and forth that I think we think about a lot, as opposed to just, are they intelligent or what's our intelligence like? We also really, notice that machine intelligence and artificial intelligence have got really good doing things we don't think much of. Like they pass Turing tests because they're really good at surveillance, at porn, at dating. And then we really worry why we don't solve problems that we actually have that we think of that are essentially dating apps. Like, for example, writing recommendation letters that's the bane of every academic's life. Just a dating app. It's just a dating app. Why can't we get some machine learning in there? Okay. We're also really interested in what kind of reality your models have. So are they phylogenetic in some way? Is there some kind of isomorphism? Are they ontogenetic? Are they social in some way? what corresponds to what, and is it cheating that AlphaGo got to play so many games, or was it just actually unbelievably parsimonious given it didn't have billions of years of evolution, et cetera, et cetera? So those kinds of questions, what, if any, other correlates are really interesting to us. We're also really interested in all the stuff that social learning does, including the kinds of things where non-human animals that don't have some of the criteria that we associate with intelligence of humans, like snow monkeys, for example, that have cultural and historical transmission. They let other snow monkeys know where to go to find the good hot springs, and that's dependent on where they grew up. And then they don't have all the self-reflexivity and things, or they may have, but they may not have, that we have. So which bits of intelligence are needed, and how do you build in those things is really, really interesting to us. We focused a lot on the autonomous form of AI, and as everybody always talks about, it's super tropic. There are certain things that always happen, especially the sci-fi things. So robots always have emergent intelligence, they have emergent emotions, and then guess what? They have moral landscapes, and then they plot. They plot and they overthrow us, or they're better than us, or they're worse than us, or they do something. Usually if they're apes, they're worse than us, and if they're robots, they're better than us. Sometimes it's the other way around. So we have a long, long history tropically of what we think the fears are associated with that. But we're also seeing a real rise of narratives of pleasure around the idea of robots, especially robots that have AI and machine learning that fit in that intersection of those groups. We're also scared of autonomous warfare. It seems unintuitive to us that you would always be able to go in and stop something happening. It seems that the better something gets, the more it is able to lock you out or lock you down and not let you get in there. I think general people are really excited by assistive and augmentative machine learning for living well with various kinds of disabilities, as well as overcoming all kinds of barriers. And the fantasies, again, are everywhere. Everyone's seen the ads of, you imagine that you're 18 and you're in Paris or you're in Delhi or you're somewhere really romantic and you're whispering to some guy or girl or whatever your object of desire is in one language, and it's coming out in a heart-shaped bubble in her ear or his ear that you said, I really love you, in some utterly different language, and it was simultaneously translated. So these sort of desires are becoming, again, almost as tropic as some of the fears. Hybrid human AI systems raise huge challenges for conforming to social norms and for laws designed for things for human capabilities, for discrete boundaries of the self, and for national borders. So all the things that we associate as the primary building blocks of the modern nation state, even the level of hybridization, the level of social media and things that we have already, is making all of those really, really problematic. Okay, in the machine learning threats category, this whole box of things that on our side of campus we call algorithmic oppression, algorithmic filtering, algorithmic triage, is really, really important, and people are tracking this in all kinds of ways at the moment. From the House of Commons report, Dave Copeland from Microsoft was quoted as saying in AI, every time an algorithm is written, embedded within it will be all the biases that exist in the humans who created that, and that's been discussed a lot already today. There are many scholars working on these terms around calling things like algorithmic oppression, including Sophia Noble, Cathy O'Neill, of course, and Jim Holston, and so on. From our point of view, whether it's supervised, whether it's unsupervised, whether it's semi-supervised, whether it's reinforcement learning, they all seem problematic in regard to all of these. We've yet to be convinced that any one of those is any better in this regard, and we've yet to be convinced the validation verification do anything to help the problem. I mentioned just now the question about autonomous weapons. Another area that people are really focused on, and we're focused on at our campus quite a lot, is the future of work, and that's you'll see people discussing this everywhere. Somebody mentioned that there's a long body of work in the history of science and technology earlier today that deals with the questions of and hypotheses around whether or not new technologies are de-skilling or reskilling or super-skilling, exactly what kinds of, when you have new technologies, what do they do? And there are people working in the social studies of science and technology right now to bring those older ideas in, exactly as was said to us earlier. From my part of campus, one of the things that we're really interested in is that many of the things that seem that they are going to be the most resistant to automation are things that have been heavily racialized and gendered and heavily associated with immigration in the past. Those are really, really primal drives, and they're typically to do with kin work. They might be in the reproductive as opposed to the productive economy. They might be in the informal economy as opposed to the formal economy. Are we going to see a moment where that kind of work gets moved inside capitalism more, gets valued? And I think Ben asked a question about the value of certain kinds of work earlier, where it gets moved inside of the way we value work more, or are we going to continue to keep those kinds of work outside of formal economies and then have a massive a de-skilling or loss of jobs through automation in everything above that, but below the highly skilled jobs? Of course, as people have been saying, it's very hard to predict what new jobs will be created, and that's been one of the things that's happened in past waves of innovation. The problem of exacerbating inequality is enormous, and it cuts across the swathe of things. Digital divides. I think the only big thing that's happened to change how people think about digital divides is that people used to say digital divide, and now people say digital divides. They recognize that it's really, really segmented, and there are so many kinds of digital divide. Environmental justice and ecological concerns continue to be very important around data hardware and data storage and data cooling. In general, this idea or this model that fast innovation leads to extreme economic inequality. Extreme economic inequality is associated with all kinds of societal level ills, with all kinds of social ills, and is it necessary that in this era, with this level of innovation in these technologies, do we have to go through 20 years of extreme inequality, 50 years of extreme inequality, or are there ways to short-circuit that? People are also really, really concerned about these algorithmic bubbles, these kinds of ways in which we think that we're talking to everyone and we're only talking to a few people. Even just the difference between me and the rest of you in this room, and we're all working in some of the issues that are similar. So many people talk at the moment about doing what I do every day. I do this kind of bubble hygiene, where I go and I make myself do 37 seconds on Fox News, and go and read something from just to get back some different results tomorrow. And then I never quite can, because I'm a UC Berkeley faculty, so I can never overcome my always already too liberal way of being classified. So I'm doomed to go on having to repeat that algorithmic cleansing every day, probably for the rest of my life, or my working life at least. So how to get more of a sense of what other people are thinking, to understand what motivates other people, and so on, is really important. Lest we think that that these issues are only to do with urban centers, it's really important to remember how much, for example, the farming community is taking up machine learning, drones, robotics, and so on. And then to remember from sites like that how many limits there are. So you can pick some fruits, you can pick grapes automatically, but you can't pick citrus fruits or figs, for example, automatically. Some problems are just much harder to crack than others. Okay. So I'm just quickly going to end by talking about three projects that I'm involved in. One is called Science Fair, and the fair part of Science Fair originally stood for Feminist, Anti-Racist, and Equity, and is just a bottom-up coalition of people interested in, particularly in the areas, in the era of digitization, in the areas of personalized medicine, and machine learning and AI, but across science and technology infrastructures, interested in building social benchmarks into technical infrastructures. And that the pieces that this group is really invested in are, first of all, having some say in who the people should be who are sitting on the committees, who are built in to be responsible for checks and balances in this regard, and to be responsible for expressing some of these goals, and also making them upstream rather than implications. You'll notice that when you see that language of ELSI, it's almost the ethical, legal, and social, it's almost always followed by the word implications, which suggests that it happens later on. Whereas, as everybody's been saying all day today, it happens at every level, from provenance and procurement of basic materials through to the infrastructure and design issues. We're particularly interested in empaneling people to assess and intervene in whether or not these goals are being met in different infrastructures in these areas, who have been historically discriminated against in particular areas, or are particularly have been historically disenfranchised in areas of civic life. So, for example, people who've been medically underserved being overrepresented in those who would be responsible for setting and monitoring and fixing social goals in scientific and technical infrastructures around healthcare, and bringing in disability justice and disability rights scholars to talk about and to assess and help set goals and help assess and recalibrate infrastructures around assistive and augmentative learning, and also that would also be the case in things that are selective technologies that are looking to favor in some way people with certain attributes, where we get some of these emerging technologies coming together. In general, Science Fair highlights projects and sets goals at the interface of social justice and machine learning. One of the projects we're really interested in is whether or not you can take police body cameras and construct the other views. Can you construct a camera-like view from the point of view of the person who's being chased, for example, in a chase or in an altercation? Could you construct the bystander smartphone type view from the data, because we know it's notoriously hard to read the data on a body camera? Are we at a place yet where we can conquer some of those issues around perspective? So those are some of the issues we're interested in. A second project that is a UC Berkeley project is building up data science programs and education in ways that incorporate all corners of campus in the basic training components. And UC Berkeley's data science program, partly because of extraordinary people like Ben Yu, who's in the audience here, but Catherine Carson, Stuart Russell, a lot of these, David Culler, is doing an experiment where we're trying to build social scientific, arts, humanities, and culture, engineering, life sciences, and physical sciences into the elementary training programs on up through the most expert level for undergraduate and graduate education. So the idea is that it's no longer okay to be innumerate, and it's no longer okay to be illiterate, but we need some kind of combination, perhaps moderated to make it actually doable, because the practicalities are quite daunting. I would say again and again and again, people have said this already today, that being forgiving, just hacking away at those barriers to entry is so important. As everybody knows, one of the places that people drop out of STEM fields is they don't pass fractions. Fractions. So, do we need to, how forgiving can we be? When can we come back? We have a lot of ideology, we have a lot of ideas that there are certain things you can only do when you're really, really young. But whenever we've chosen historically to override that, we've been totally fine. Maybe you can't get a Fields Medal if you're not incredible at math by 14, but you probably can do all kinds of interesting work and not just taking tools off the shelf without knowing what a regression is. Being just much more ready to retrain, thinking much more vocationally. And I think somebody said this morning that people, where the technologies have changed, people do train on the job constantly and find that they do just fine. I used to always use the example of of driving, this incredible social experiment where we just said, basically, we're going to say almost everyone can do it. We're going to say almost everyone can operate heavy machinery at high speeds in close proximity to one another. Nuts. Absolutely nuts. But it more or less worked, of course, with incredible amounts of regulation. So don't always think that regulation is bad for innovation. Regulation's been extraordinarily productive of innovation in those realms. So now that we're moving into the autonomous driving era, I'll need to come up with some other examples. But we've seen in medical school entries in recent years in the United States that they began taking 10%, some schools began taking 10% of their entering class from social sciences and humanities, and then some programs have taken it up to half of their class now. Give them a back program in the technical things, and they find that the mix of skills is just really great, and the senior physicians can't tell apart what people's backgrounds were at the beginning. So having that kind of idea that we just must be more ready to retrain, I think is really important. In general, I think that we should reinvest in vocational training much more than we are doing. Countries like Switzerland and Germany and things have been a lot better at this than the UK and America. But we've defined meritocracy, we've defined the idea of inequality, but that's still fair, around getting into elite colleges. But elite colleges aren't training people very well at the moment. High schools are teaching things that are incredibly inappropriate relative to what's actually happening in our world. And so maybe moving into a phase where we're not having hundreds of thousands of amazingly talented kids competing for just a very few places in a very, very historically obsolete set of disciplines, but opening that field way out again. And then finally, I wanted to end with the kind of future of humanity and robot love. And this is where just how many people really do think about that combination of AI and general artificial intelligence and robots, and really have a desire for it. I couldn't think of a better way than to quote my 16-year-old mixed-race daughter, who, when I asked her what she thought I should say, texted the following to me. "A personal question of mine I'd love if you could get some answers, please. It's whether the future for robots would be for the individual, whether that's for pleasure, therapy, company, service, etc., or if the future will be focused on using them for our country's advantage, military, etc. Will they ever be a personal item?" A personal item? If so, would they have rights? Would their rights matter without consciousness? What's the pushback on the theories of robots taking jobs? Can we have a Westworld, not the settler colonial imaginary, just some sort of amusement park to experience AI firsthand, not a luxury vacation, but more of an experience for those interested? And then when I asked her what she was doing when she was not doing her homework on ethics for AP English the other night, but was instead writing furiously, she said, "I'm putting together a robot ethics framework," and as she called out to me, "Those bras need some ethics." So, and the ethics that those bras need, apparently, is as much to do with how we treat them as how they treat us and how they treat one another. Thank you for your attention.